today I'm going to talk about internal rotation of the hip and how that pertains to runners. We've had a lot of runners coming in asking for different drills and different things to do. And before I attack strength, giving you strengthening drills to kind of work on just getting those muscles that we're constantly using within the running community, it's always good to address the hip and how its actions are influencing the knee and the ankle. Because a lot of times in the clinic, runners tend to be people that, have full-time jobs, right? And tend to be kind of stuck in this almost external rotation within their hip. So with that, we'll be kind of stuck with that foot out position at our hip. So when we're coming back to get into hip extension, that foot is still in relative hip external rotation and we can't get our big toe down. So we end up kind of pulling with our hip flexors as we run. And that's going to put a lot of tension not only through the hip, but also through our low back. So we think about where that psoas muscle we talk about a lot attaches into the low back. If it gets really overworked and overused, it's going to cause compression not only in front, but also within our low back. So one of the big things we can work on before we even start getting into strength, like I said, is just working on hip internal rotation capacity. And we'll kind of talk about what that means as we go on. But as we go into a running stance, or just what is required of running, we know that we need good hip extension, right? But we also need that internal rotation component, because that extension and internal rotation at our hip helps us get the big toe to the ground. And that big toe is what's going to help propel us forward as we run. So it's really crucial that we get that range of motion worked on and at least active before we go out on a run. So one of my favorite ways to kind of get an idea of where our hip range of motion is at or hip control is at from just an active standpoint, i.e. you using your hip and not someone else moving your hip, is just to do a full CAR, and that stands for controlled articular rotation. It's from Functional Range Conditioning. They have great stuff if you're looking to increase joint capacity. But to do this exercise, you can have something to kind of stabilize with, so you're not wobbling around. It's not a balance exercise. We're looking to see your joint range. So I don't want you to be like wobbling back and forth as we're trying to go through this exercise. I want you to be pretty stable. So if you need something to kind of hold you up, whether it be a wall, a doorway, anything where we can get this hip through its full range without worrying about, if we're going to fall over or not, is kind of the goal. So what we're going to do, we'll start from the front and then I'll do one from the side as well, is we're going to go up as high into hip flexion as we can, and then we're going to bring that foot across. So this is going to be kind of our starting position. Our goal is to bring that leg up as high as possible. So you should be feeling some good contraction coming through those muscles on the front side of your leg. From here, we're going to rotate out into abduction here. So we're going to bring the leg out that way. When we kind of hit that end range there, we're going to kind of bring the knee down this way. Now the goal with these two is to kind of keep your torso or your upper body facing forward and not getting here and then rotating, right? Because if we're rotating here, I'm not rotating through the hip. I'm rotating through my body or my opposite hip, and that's not the goal of this exercise or this assessment. So again, up this way as high as we can. We're going to come on out. Once we get to that end range of abduction, we're going to pretend that we're trying to rotate our knee down or our foot back, and we're going to come at internal rotation, come back around and through, and end back through hip extension. And then I'll do this from the side on the way back. So on the way back, we're going to start with hip extension here. Now, I say hip extension, it's not lumbar extension, so don't bring the lumbar spine back with you. Try to keep really stacked, really tight through your core. Almost feel like there's like something connecting the bottom of your rib cage and that front of your pelvis together, and you're keeping those things tight. So we don't want to see this like opening or flaring of the rib cage here. We want it to be pure hip motion, not low back motion or front, core motion here. I want this to all come from the hip. So again, here, knee bent, extension there. You should be feeling some contraction coming through your glute and probably your hamstring as well, especially with this knee bend motion, kind of activating the hamstring there. Good. And then we're gonna come back out, rotating back and around through here, back over here into hip flexion, and then dropping down there. Okay, so again, if you need to do that drill with something to hold you up, I highly recommend it. This is to get an idea of where your hip's at, and it's also a great way to warm up the full hip joint for any activity you're trying to do. All right, so now that we kind of have an idea of how our hip feels going through a full range of motion, we can start kind of getting after some higher level hip ranges here. So we're going to start with internal rotation. This is going to be a pails and rails contraction of the hip. So we'll be kind of in this 90-90 position of our hip. And this is a tough position for some people. So if you have any pain or discomfort anywhere while in this position, just come out of it. We can, talk about other ways to get this same range of motion. For example, if you have some pain here, maybe it's way too stressful on your knee to be in this position, what we can do is get a pillow or something to kind of elevate the knee up. That'll take some of that stress off. But again, ideally we'd like to be in this nice 90-90 position. And what I mean by 90-90 is that front leg is going to be at a 90-degree angle. So hip, knee, and you're going to have a little bit of variance back and forth, probably the dominant leg. But do your best to kind of get in this position as purely as you can, and then we can make modifications as we go. So from here, we're going to work on hip internal rotation today. So this back leg is going to be the one that's going to be in internal rotation. So there's a few ways to kind of cue this. What we're going to do is kind of rotate into it, and we can lean back, and you should be getting a deep stretch through the inside part of your hip. It's not going to feel necessarily like a muscle stretch. It's going to feel more deep than that. So if it feels a little different than what you're used to, that's okay. Again, no pain here. We're just looking for a stretch. And this is going to be something we're going to sit in for a little bit, up to 2 minutes in this position. So while we're waiting here, you can take some deep breaths in and out and really sink into that range of motion. So it's been 2 minutes. I'm just going to say that for the sake of the video. So our goal here now is, while we're in this position, either leaning back, or ideally you could be here and kind of really feeling that hip. But again, if you need to be here, that's fine too. Whatever helps you get tension through that hip, I don't really care, as long as we're feeling it in the hip. We're all going to be at different levels when we do these sorts of things. So as soon as we kind of get that accumulation of 2 minutes in that position, we're going to pretend that there is a weight scale, that this black mat here is a weight scale, and my knee is going to be pushing down into it. So we'll go down 10%, 20%, and we're going to build up all the way to about 100% contraction of me pushing down. Now, 100% contraction means your whole body should be kind of irradiating this tension. So it should be kind of like a full inhale, and you're going to sink in, and you're going to be pushing this tissue and flexing and keeping everything really tense. And this whole leg should be shaking and pushing into the ground. Now you might get some cramping. That's just neurological confusion, because your body trying to figure out what the hell you're trying to do to it, okay? So that's normal if it happens. It's not a big deal. If it cramps, kind of back out of it and just kind of let those muscles relax. So good. So once you get to 100% here, good, hold that for about a 10-second count. After that 10-second count, our goal here is, you can't see my foot here, let me scoot up this leg just a little bit. So my goal here is to stay in that internal stretch, so keep that same tension, and we're going to try to lift that leg up. Now, if you're in your true end range motion of hip internal rotation, you probably won't be able to lift this leg up quite yet. And if this is your first time doing it, it's going to feel like it's impossible, and that's fine too. Really, the goal here is just to build more capacity into the hip. So don't worry if that's not something you're feeling. If this doesn't lift up at all, that's completely normal. For me right now, I'm in my end range internal rotation, so I'm really not lifting this up, but I'm just trying to contract these tissues to bring this into internal rotation. Now, if I lean forward here and take tension off, then I can get that leg off the ground. But again, that's not the intent. The intent is to activate and try to pull this leg off the ground while I'm in this position, grinding more hip internal rotation. So after all those words, you will have done probably 10 to 15 seconds of just a max trying to lift that off the ground. And once you feel like you've really exhausted that tissue, deep breath, and then you can either sink further into the range of motion and go back into that pails contraction, or that first contraction we did where you're pressing into the ground. So again, we'll start by pressing the knee down into the floor, all the way ramping up to 100%. And then we're gonna try to lift the leg up off the floor here to put in an internal rotation there, okay? So if you're a runner, try these two things. Do them before you run. See if it opens up your hip a little bit more.